So, John, you're living in a winter wonderland.
Hey, Carrie. Yep, winter's here. It's snowing in Idaho as we speak.
It's snowing in Idaho. Is that your own private Idaho?
My own private Idaho. And my own private snowblower is what I'm going to work on next. I'm going to get that thing out and clear the driveway.
Was this the first major snow of the season?
This isn't even a major snow today, really. But
you only got 6 inches?
It's the first thing that I felt like I need to do something about. Normally, the first few are kind of, an inch of snow, and it's going to be 38 degrees this afternoon, so wait till it melts and don't bother with it. But this one, I needed to do something about.
I love it. So it's so if you get more than like 6 inches, that's 6 inches or less is like nothing. You just go along your merry way and wait for the real big snow to come.
Well, basically, yeah. Anything that's going to melt on its own, you let it melt on its own. And if it's not, then you need to get it off the driveway before it partially melts and then freezes during the night. And then you've got this ice slick. Nothing you have to worry about, Carrie.
Yeah. Well, it's a little cold here today. The guys at Starbucks were complaining because it was a really bone-chilling 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
All Floridians have their winter jackets on out there then, huh?
Yeah, and I asked Alexa, she gave me the wrong temperature. I mean, I don't think I asked her the temperature in Singapore. I think I said, just give me the temperature. And I thought it was 70-something, so I put on my T-shirt. Honestly, it wasn't too cold for a T-shirt for me. But for these guys, forget about it. So, hey, but if I had a yellow vest, I would have thought about putting it on, John. The Yellow Vest Rebellion in France is continuing unabated. This Macron guy doesn't know what to do. He calls out 90,000 members of the armed forces and the cops and everything else. They arrest thousands of people for no reason, and he can't stop it. It's just getting worse and worse for him. Just another example of what happens when you cross Donald Trump, huh?
Well, this is definitely an example of what happens when a country starts to spin out of control financially. Because, France has been taking on increasing amounts of debt, partially to pay for extremely generous social welfare benefits and create a system in which life is pretty good in the short run. In other words, you make more money than maybe you produce, and your retirement starts early and runs long and pays you well. And that's what Europe in general has done. And meanwhile, to pay for all of that, they have a demographic issue because births are falling, which they're doing across the world right now. Anytime you educate women, surprise, surprise, they have fewer kids. So birth rates in the European extracted part of the world and big parts of Asia are plunging, which creates a financial issue. In other words, who's going to take care of the old people when they retire if you don't have a lot of young workers? So Europe, with France in the lead, made the decision to bring in a lot of immigrants. There are issues with assimilation with the people they're bringing in that is frustrating a lot of people in Europe. And that's why Italy now has an anti-immigration coalition in charge, and why the right-wing parties, the right-wing populist parties, are doing so well in so many places in Europe. And no doubt there's a lot of anxiety in France and a lot of frustration in France about the immigration issue. But if you look at the demands that the Yellow Vest protesters are making, immigration gets one line, and it's very vague. And everything else is about job security and increasing the minimum wage and solidifying retirement benefits. It's basically something out of the social democratic left, or as we, I guess, now call it in the U.S., democratic socialism. Mm-hmm. So this seems to be, it was clearly started by the fuel tax increase. That was the spark that lit the fuse. And now they've got a lot of other demands that they're making, and it'll be interesting to see if the government can can satisfy any of them, let alone all of them, because France is functionally bankrupt, as is so much of the developed world right now. If you insisted that they produce an honest accounting of their finances, it would look like a bankrupt company.
Yeah.
In other words, negative cash flow and negative net worth, on and on like that. And that's their case. So the idea that they're going to be able to increase social benefits and increase worker protections, for instance, make it harder and harder for companies to fire people, that just pushes them further down the road that they're already on, which maybe gets Macron through the next election. Hard to say whether he gets to stay in office or not.
No. I think he's honest. I think he's really finished.
Yeah. But then the question becomes, who replaces him? If they put in a clone of that guy in office to replace him, then we have the same problems as before.
Well, that's okay. But it might very well happen. But I tend to think they're looking for hope and change that they can really believe in this time, John.
Yeah, which means the two fringe parties now. There's a Socialist Party, a very far left Socialist Party, and then there's the National Front, which is kind of sort of far right, although they're kind of a mixed bag to American eyes. They're not neo-Nazis by any stretch of the imagination.
Although they're portrayed as such, yes.
Yeah, even though they're portrayed as such. But those are the two parties that would end up in charge if the center collapses and people who Macron in place
when it collapses,
aren't able to replace him.
Because look, Marine Le Pen, all she's got to do is run on the "I told you so" platform. I told you this was going to happen 2 years ago when I only got 28% or something. It was a high
percent in the runoff. Yeah, she lost 60 to 40 to Macron.
Yeah, so she just has to go back and play videos of their debates and what she said was going to happen, and she'll win. I don't think this is what happens when the fringe candidate hits critical mass and then the ruling party implodes, which is exactly what they're doing. They're imploding, John, and they're basically toast. Just stick a fork in Macron and the party. Obviously, things can change. Maybe they'll stop demonstrating tomorrow. Maybe France will have unparalleled prosperity like they've never had before. But the odds are that's not going to happen,
Well, you could also say that the far left party could run on "I told you so" as well, though, because if you look at the demands that the yellow vest protesters are making, it's right down the alley of the socialists. It's all except for one line that says something very vague about immigration. It's all about raising the wages of workers and protecting them from being fired and increasing retirement benefits, et cetera, which is the left, So the protesters who are in the street right now presumably would vote socialist if they got the chance based on the demands that they're making. So, it's not 100% clear that the National Front would be the winner in the next election. It might be them against the socialists, and then who knows, I'm not sure calling the far left socialists in France's case is correct, because that term is used differently here or there than here. So there might be another term for those guys that's even further to the left than the socialists. I think the socialists are one of the mainstream parties. But anyhow, the next election would almost certainly be more chaotic than the last one. And the last one was pretty unusual because the two main parties, Macron wasn't from either of the two main political parties. He started his own party as kind of a reformist movement.
Yeah, but he's a lightweight, though. I mean, it was obvious to me, I don't know about to you, he's a lightweight, and he was just going to toe the line. And here he is now just scooping people up off the streets, John.
Kerry, he tried a few things. I mean, he did try to make some changes, but they were very modest by U.S. standards.
Yeah.
But they were enough to set this thing off. Although, raising fuel taxes in France, where fuel taxes are already incredibly high, they pay twice as much for gas as we do.
Of course.
So that could have been just a straw that breaks the camel's back thing, where he was kind of scratching at an open wound for anybody who has to drive to work in France. And so it could be that was just so ham-fisted, it was so tone-deaf that that's what set this off, rather than the fact that gas got a little more expensive. It was just something where people weren't going to take any more on this specific issue, and that set them off. And then once they were in the streets, they decided that they wanted to make a lot of other changes and demand a lot more. And here we are with a huge page of stuff that Macron has to deal with somehow.
That's for sure. Hey, and by the way, we're talking, Kevin, if you're listening, we're really responding to your email from last week. I think the immigration, John, is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Better off not talking about it, but eventually that's what the whole election is going to revolve around. And if you watch Paul Joseph Watson's YouTube videos of what's going on in Paris, that it's an S-hole, that you've got hundreds of no-go zones by the police where Sharia law rules. This is very much about unfettered immigration, and you see that Italy has stopped it. They won't allow any of those aid ships to set foot in an Italian port, and in fact, the organizations in charge of them have stopped sending the ships now. So this is a reaction to it. Might not be at the top of the story, but it's certainly in there, and it's certainly major. And if it's as big a factor as we think, like immigration in the U.S. election was in Trump's rise, then we could expect Marine Le Pen to get that 60%. I'm sure she'll be a failed leader before she even steps foot into the palace, whatever it is, wherever their seat of government is in France. But really, John, it's nobody wants to talk about it. Hey, so we got a thing from someone, an FSN member in Australia, Eric in Australia. He sent me a bunch of stuff, and he's saying that when he bought something from the U.S., he got a statement, and it said the U.S. dollar value was $2.89, but there was an SDR value of $2.05. SDRs are special drawing rights. You can't. I've never met anybody who had an SDR that they could show me in their pocket, a bill or anything, because it's totally a fictitious currency that's just there for the big boys to have a stable measure of whatever is going on in these banks. But don't you think it's interesting? Like, have you ever seen anything denoted in SDRs?
No, I really haven't. But it's important to understand that the SDR is just a big con.
Yeah, like all the others.
Well, all it is a currency based on a basket of other major currencies.
Right.
Okay. So it's got dollars and euros and pound sterling and yen and probably yuan in there now. I think that yuan was just added to it.
Yeah.
Which means that it derives its value from the major fiat currencies of the world. And since the major fiat currencies of the world are failed experiments in giving governments unlimited credit cards, something based on the value of those currencies is only as valuable as those currencies are, which is, functionally zero. That's what they're all headed for. So Jim Rickards thinks that the SDR standard will be the next thing that we go to when individual fiat currencies start failing, and that will buy us a little bit of time. But, it's hard to see how it buys much time because, again, it's only made up of these currencies that are failing. So as a solution to failed currencies, a basket of those failed currencies doesn't seem like a long-term way for us to solve our financial problems. Right. So it's possible that we will start using SDRs as a medium of exchange, but it's probable that it tanks along with the currencies that are in its basket.
Yeah.
So once the next stage of this process starts, which is the global economy starts to fall apart as it did in 2007, 2008, the central banks step up and start buying up every asset in sight, flooding the system with new currency. But this time around, the numbers are so big that it doesn't work. We respond to this huge oversupply of currency by dumping those currencies wholesale. So we get the Austrian School of Economics crack-up boom. And at that point, maybe they try to step in with SDRs, but it doesn't seem like it'll work. Some kind of gold-backed thing is what is going to have to get us out of this.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, though, since nobody knows what an SDR is, and, right, everybody's clueless about it, what if we just make our own SDR, John, and we'll sell it, and we'll do it 1-for-1 on the U.S. dollar, $1 per SDR, and I think we could start our own market in it because nobody knows. It's the ultimate derivative. It derives its value from other currencies that have no value. So somehow making it this derivative is going to solve all of the world's problems. I think we're better off creating those trillion-dollar coins and printing up 20 of them and paying off all the U.S.'s debt. I think it'll be a more effective means of going about it than this crazy thing.
Well, this is kind of reminiscent of the housing bubble when they were taking essentially worthless mortgages and bundling them into asset-backed securities, which were rated AAA by Standard & Poor's and Moody's. And then they were bundling those asset-backed bonds into higher-level derivatives, which were also rated AAA by Standard & Poor's and Moody's. So you got a derivative of a derivative of a derivative, which eventually blew up and almost took down the global financial system. Well, the SDR could be seen as a derivative of the derivative, like you said, and the original asset is worthless, which is even worse. Some of those mortgages actually had some value.
Oh, they did, especially in retrospect.
Yeah, but fiat currencies have no intrinsic value. They exist only because we trust the guys managing those currencies. And once that trust evaporates, there's no way to get it back. You can't have the same guys say, okay, look, we completely lost your trust, but we're going to do this new thing and we need you to trust us going forward. That won't work. It's not how financial markets work. So there's that time out there. It might be a year, it might be 10 years, it might even be longer than that, in which the currencies of the major countries have lost the faith of the marketplace, and they haven't been replaced by anything yet. Of course, there's always the optimistic scenario of the monetary reset when they just announce it on Sunday night that we're going back to a gold standard at $10,000 an ounce for gold. That is by far and away the least destructive way for this to play out, but it's also requiring the people in charge to voluntarily give up power, which is what makes it so unlikely. Usually power has to be yanked out of the hands of whoever has it.
Yeah.
And the marketplace will probably have to do that in this case. And what we're seeing it start here. Stocks made a little bit of a recovery when the Fed said it might not raise interest rates as much as thought. And now it's headed back down again, though. We just took out some of the previous lows this morning in the S&P 500 and the Dow, and we are either at or below the previous low for the year. So in other words, the major indexes are now down for 2018. While gold, I think, is either flat or just barely down. So finally, precious metals are starting to outperform equities. Mm-hmm. And once people get that in their head, when it's not a good idea to buy the dips anymore in Amazon, but it is a good idea to continue to add to GDX and FNV and the other big gold stocks, you've got a psychological change coming in the market that will be really interesting. And that will also be reminiscent of the last cycle. That's what happened in 2008, 2009 through 2013 when gold and silver were the best performing assets in the financial world. Mm-hmm. So we could be seeing that begin now. And it's about time.
Yeah, well, they haven't learned nothing. They have learned nothing from the last meltdown. What was that old saying about the British? I can't remember. It was a wartime quote that he learned nothing and, something like that. Anyways, if you remember that quote, I'm a quote smith. I like those quotes. I do kind of remember
it, but I don't remember it well enough to try to.
Yeah, me neither. They should probably just cut this out, but we don't cut stuff out. So,
but anyhow, it is shocking that we haven't learned the lesson of the last financial crisis because that was so recent. You know? Adults remember that.
Here it is. They've learned nothing and forgotten nothing.
Okay,
that's what happened here, right? We've learned nothing and we've forgotten nothing.
Okay.
Right? Doesn't that accurately sum it up?
Yeah, I guess it does, because we definitely don't seem to have learned much of anything because we're making the same mistakes on a bigger scale. I mean, complete with a tech stock bubble, and that's what's amazing. So many of these things have already happened in living memory of not too old adults, and we're seeing it happen again, only on a much bigger scale. So they probably are very worried at the central bank level around the world right now, and they should be. This is the kind of market that can easily get way out of hand. So I'll go out on a limb and say by the end of 2019, the Fed has not only stopped raising interest rates, but it has started cutting them aggressively.
Yeah.
And that we're, by a year from now, headed for not just NERP, or not just SERP, zero interest rate policy, but NERP, negative interest rate policy.
Oh, sure.
And that will not save us. There might be stretches when the market thinks it's going to, but those stretches will fade because these numbers are just too big.
You know what it is? It's like if you just let the forests 100 years ago burn themselves out and not screw around with them and not try to put out the fires, they would be much healthier now. But because man, thinking that he can just do anything he sets his mind to and just reverse the immutable laws of nature, says, oh, we'll just fight the fires. And the more you fight those fires, the more overgrown the forest gets. And then when it finally ignites, you can't do anything about it because it's so overgrown and so many dead trees, et cetera, there that, it just burns uncontrolled. Whereas if we just let the guys cut out some logs, thin the forest, get rid of the dead trees, that would have been one thing, but you can't fight nature. And I think, John, this is a law of nature that we're fighting. An economic law of nature is that man cannot control his future economically or in any other way. And that's where we're at.
So Kerry, speaking of California.
Yeah. Oh, was I talking about California?
You were talking about forest fire management.
Yes.
Which applies really well to California right now, because the New York Times just did a long article investigating how it happened. How did California have these apocalyptic fires when they spend so much money on fire suppression and they're the greenest state in terms of policy? And it turns out that they were actually encouraging people to move out of high-priced cities and go to the border of the forest. There's a name which I don't remember for the edge of nature.
Yes.
And they have an elected insurance commissioner.
Correct.
Because who wants to get reelected has kept homeowners insurance artificially low. People who are living in those fire zones pay $1,000 a year for homeowners insurance.
Oops.
And our house out here, I think it's like $5,000 a year or something like that for insurance. In Idaho, where there are no forest fires near us, and because of that, millions of people made that move. And they bought houses or built houses. And local contractors were able to bribe local officials to get variances on building codes. In other words, they could build flammable houses out there when the code says you really need to do this, this, and this to keep your house from burning down. So anyhow, it was a public policy failure on an epic scale. And they're not fixing it. They've got the same problems now, and they're going to have the same problems going forward. So we should expect some kind of a bailout of California when all this gets going, too, because the combination of their propensity for natural disasters and bad planning related to that, along with their mushrooming unfunded liabilities in their pension plans, they're going to go bankrupt, too. When tech stocks go down, so they're not getting the
windfall.
Windfall of capital gains, California goes bankrupt. This is it would be fun to watch if it wasn't going to hurt so many people.
Yeah, well, and also the fact that they've pretty much restricted logging in the state on the federal and the state forests. So the only people who really care about health of forests and its resistance to forest fires, but besides those of you living in the forest, you care about it. But the only other ones that care about the health of the forest is the logging industry, because they have a direct economic stake in the future viability and health of the forest. So there is many opportunities to thin out those forests, to take the